It's been an active offseason for the LA Kings, but are the Kings better now than they were a year ago? Eddie Garcia of Locked On LA Kings is here to discuss the offseason moves and the outlook for the Kings next on the Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Gil Martin here, and welcome everybody to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. With the playoffs in our rearview mirror in the NHL and NBA, the sports stop sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On LA Kings, Eddie Garcia. And Eddie, it hasn't been a dull offseason for the LA Kings. A lot of movement, but overall, how do you assess the moves that this team has made and, made one as recently as late last week?
I would say that the offseason for the Kings has been pretty underwhelming. General manager Rob Blake continues his up and down tenure as the man in charge of this team. There are a lot of people calling for his head. They were calling for it, for there to be a change at the end of the season. That did not happen. He's going into the final year of his contract. If you're looking at the hottest hot seats of general managers around the league, I would think Rob Blake would be at the top of that list. I know Steve Yzerman in Detroit might get more publicity, if you will, because look, they're both Hall of Famers. They're both running the teams that they had their best success with. But Steve Yzerman's won a cup and put a cup team together elsewhere, and now he's in Detroit trying to rebuild things. And I know that the patience is running out, but I think the patience already run out with the Kings, to be honest with you. So the offseason for the Kings, though, has been, again, underwhelming. They lose a defenseman in Matt Roy for absolutely nothing as a UFA. Victor Arvidsson has moved on, and he went to a division rival in Edmonton, who's beaten the Kings 3 years in a row in the playoffs. But there were some good things. Quentin Byfield, the young the young center for the Kings, the young forward, he signs a really nice deal, 5 years, $5.25 million per year. A lot of people thought that was a very good deal. I didn't go all in on the 8 years yet, right? But it didn't do a bridge deal necessarily. They kind of met in the middle. I think a lot of people like that deal. Brought in a few guys. Warren Fogle comes over from Edmonton, Joel Edmondson from St. Louis. And then you've got Tanner Jeannot in a draft day trade from Tampa Bay. I think a very mixed bag on those guys. I think Fogle's a nice blue collar kind of a guy, but probably a third line guy. He might play on the second line with the Kings. Joel Edmondson, I thought the term and the contract for him were really bad. He gets a 4-year deal. He's going to make $3.85 million a year for a 31-year-old defenseman who's going to be a third pairing guy. I don't understand the term and the investment in somebody like that. And Tanner Jeannot, right? He had their great rookie year in Nashville. He's a big, strong, tough guy. And I think the Kings want to get more blue collar and be tougher. And I understand the reasoning behind that, but is that enough to offset the losses they had and to make them better? Of course, there was the Pierre-Luc Dubois trade, which felt like an addition by subtraction in some ways, but the whole deal, giving up the assets they did to Winnipeg to bring him in and then have to hit the eject button, and you get Darcy Kuemper in net, who's won a Stanley Cup but hasn't been very good in Washington the last couple of seasons. So I would say, looking at the moves made in the offseason, it's hard to make a case the Kings are better now than they were at this time last year.
3 years in a row, the Kings have been eliminated by Edmonton in the playoffs. What is the big obstacle facing this team to get over that hump?
Well, Edmonton's obviously very good. And I think sometimes we look at it that way, and I understand it. And I'm not saying that's not the right question, but I think you do have to give credit to the Oilers. Maybe the Kings have a better fate if they had a better matchup, but that's the way the NHL playoff system is the way it is, and the Kings have to deal with it. So certainly special teams were huge in the playoffs this year. The Oilers, not only their power play, but their penalty kill shut down the Kings power play completely. The special teams were so lopsided that was really the key. So the Kings getting better on special teams certainly could be a part of that. I think though for the Kings, they're looking at going with a lot of their homegrown talent and hoping those guys can step forward and at least make up for the production they lost in the offseason, which I think they can. But Quinton Byfield, I mentioned him earlier, had a breakout year last year, scoring 20 goals and just eclipsing all of his previous career highs dramatically in goals and assists and points. It looks like they're going to move him back to his natural position of center. He had been playing on the wing on the top line. So that's going to be a big move for him. I know he's very excited about that. But they have a lot of young guys. Another former first-round pick in Alex Turcotte is a guy who's had a lot of injury issues. He finally was healthy last year. He got a taste of the NHL and looked pretty good. Looks like he's going to get a full-time role this year. Another young player is Akil Thomas, a former second-round pick. Looks like he's going to get a full-time role this year. Got a little taste last season. So there's some younger guys. Also, I should mention defenseman Brant Clark, another former first-round pick. He had a great year in the AHL last year, his first full pro season. He's had a cup of coffee with the Kings here and there. He's going to come in and get a full-time role on the blue line. Not sure if it's going to be second pairing or third pairing, but very excited about him. He's the most dynamic offensive defenseman the Kings have had since they drafted Drew Doughty. So there are a lot of young players that are question marks. They're going to get their chance. I'm sure they're going to be young and they're going to be hungry to prove and get their opportunity to see what they can do with it. So the Kings are kind of going in on some younger guys and hoping that they can come in and provide a lot of energy and excitement as well.
How confident are you with the goaltending situation as it stands right now?
Not real confident, to be honest with you. That said, a lot of people weren't confident in Cam Talbot last year when they brought him in. His season before in Ottawa was not good, and he completely turned it around, was an all-star, did slump in the second half and did get replaced in the playoffs. So it didn't completely work out. I think, had it been maybe a full season and had they advanced in the playoffs, I think he's brought back for another year, but that didn't happen. Darcy Kuemper was the price they paid to get rid of Pierre-Luc Dubois and not retain any of his contract. The Capitals wanted to get rid of Darcy Kuemper now that they've got Charlie Lindgren, and the Kings were willing to take on the rest of his contract. He's making, I believe, just short of $5 million a year. So it's not nothing. It's for a guy who's lost his starting job last year and has struggled the last 2 years. But then 3 years ago, he did have the cup run in Colorado. I know people will say that was a stacked team. Lots of goalies could have won a cup with that team. Well, he did. So the Kings, I think, are a better defensive team than the Capitals. So I think Kuemper can bounce back, and I think he can be good enough. And that's kind of where the Kings are right now. The last few years, they're just looking for goalies that are good enough. Not a goaltender that's going to be the reason why you win, but a goalie you can win with. So I think they feel like he can be another Cam Talbot that with a better defensive team around him. And he was briefly in Los Angeles and had a great run here many years ago before the Kings traded him to Arizona. So I think cautiously optimistic would be what I would say for Darcy Kuemper.
You mentioned Rob Blake being on the hot seat. What will it take for him to get another contract with the LA Kings at the end of this season?
That's a very good question. And it's an interesting position that Kings fans have been put in, because I think there's a significant group of fans that would like to see a change. And yet, what are you going to do? Root against the Kings to lose? So that happens. Obviously, you don't want to do that. If the Kings can get back in the playoffs, I would say they're a bubble team. But if they can get back in the playoffs, and if they can finally get out of the first round, which they haven't done 3 years in a row, and their last 4 trips to the postseason, all first round exits, that might be enough to get him an extension. I would be surprised if that happens. I really think they should have made the move to bring in another GM at the end of the season. He's a lame duck GM and isn't in a great position. If all the young guys play really well, if Darcy Kuemper bounces back, if Quinton Byfield moves to center and suddenly that three-headed monster the Kings thought they were going to have with Pierre-Luc Dubois, with Kopitar and Byfield and Philip Deneau down the middle suddenly becomes what they thought they were going to have last year, then maybe it all works out and maybe they extend him for a couple more years. I don't know, but it's a very interesting position to kind of be in, because it seems like the Kings are regressing. They were moving in a very positive direction, got in the playoffs 3 years ago, 7 games with the Oilers. But since then, it seems like they took a little bit of a step back last year, even though they had a good regular season. And then I don't know. It doesn't seem like things are moving in the right direction. It's been 8 years of Rob Blake and no playoff wins. That speaks pretty loud.
All right. Well, I know, Eddie, you'll cover that every step of the way this season and beyond. Why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
We are Locked On LA Kings. Please don't search Locked On Kings, because you'll get a certain Sacramento basketball team if you do. So make sure you search for Locked On LA Kings wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. And if you want to follow me, I'm Eddie on Fox on X and Twitter.
All right, Eddie.
Did I say that right? I think I did. Yeah.
I think you did. Eddie, thanks so much. Always a pleasure.
All right, Gil. Thank you.
Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much I never want them to stop. But with the Stanley Cup playoffs and the NBA playoffs in our rearview mirror, there are just fewer games, and the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Certainly, Major League Baseball in full swing now as we race toward the playoffs. You've got the summer games in Paris. And how about football futures and hockey futures? Lots to check out on FanDuel. Head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel.com, FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball.